Hello, my name is Orlando Torresia from thinkistorresia.com, and in this video we are going to explain what rent plus VAT minus withholding tax means. Well, in a lease contract for a premises, for example, this applies to premises, real estate in general, that are not residential properties, because residential properties are not subject to VAT, except in certain cases, which we will discuss and have covered in other videos. So, in the case of a premises, the tenant and the landlord agree on a price. Let's say that price is 1,000 euros. Then, the landlord grants the tenant the use of the premises in exchange for that price of 1,000 euros. Right, so if the state didn't exist, if the tax office didn't exist, that would be the price, which is what is stated in the contract. The rental price, the rent would be 1,000 euros, which the tenant pays to the landlord. Okay, but we have the state, we have the tax office telling you, the price must include VAT. VAT today is 21%, so the tenant has to pay the price plus VAT, which would be 1,000 plus 21%. 1210, 210 euros of VAT, and that should be paid to the landlord. And that would be the end of it. But what happens? Since the tax office doesn't trust the landlord, that he will later declare those 1,000 euros on his income tax return. What does it do? It tells the tenant, instead of paying 1,000 euros to the landlord for renting the premises, you are going to pay 1,000 minus a withholding which you will apply to the landlord. And you will give it to me, the tax office. That withholding is 19%. So the tenant, instead of paying the 1,000 plus VAT, 1210 to the landlord, will pay 1,000 minus the withholding, minus 19%, plus VAT, plus 21% to the landlord. And the 19%, 190 euros, must be paid to the tax office every quarter. So what will happen is that the tenant's monthly invoice will be 1,000 euros plus VAT, minus the withholding applied by the tenant to the landlord. Because here, keep in mind, there is always a third party. There is the landlord, there is the tenant, and there is a third party. The tenant pays the 1,000 to the landlord minus 190. That is, the tenant pays the landlord 810 plus VAT, which would be 210. That is, the tenant pays 1020 to the landlord and 190 euros to the tax office. Then the tax office will see that the landlord has 190 euros paid in every month by the tenant. And in the landlord's income tax return, in the IRPF, that is where the tax office will settle the accounts with the landlord. So this is the VAT, the withholding and the rent in a lease contract. The withholding is made using Form 115. Every quarter the tenant has to pay that 19% quarterly, using that Form 115. And then the landlord adjusts it in the annual IRPF return for that year, depending on what he has to pay. If he doesn't have to pay anything, then you will get it back. And those 190 euros will be recovered by the landlord the following year in the income tax return. I hope you found this helpful. Orlando Torresia. Until next videos, God willing, and have a good day.